I was standing in my driveway in Rochester, Minnesota, admiring the bright orange snow fence I just finished installing along my property line, when I heard the unmistakable sound of high heels clacking against frozen pavement at exactly 7:30 on that frigid Saturday morning in January. "Excuse me, sir." The voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet morning air like nails on a chalkboard. I turned around to see a woman in her mid-50s marching toward me, her blonde bob bouncing with each aggressive step. She wore a puffy white vest over a turtleneck, designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and an expression that told me this conversation was going to be anything but pleasant. I wiped the frost off my gloves and waited for her to reach me. "Morning," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Can I help you? I'm Patricia Whitmore, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association." She stuck out her hand, not for a handshake, but pointing directly at my snow fence. "And I need to talk to you about that eyesore you've just erected on your property." I glanced back at the fence, then at Patricia. "The snow fence, is that what you're calling it?" Her lips pursed into a thin line. "It's hideous. Orange plastic mesh, really." "This is a prestigious neighborhood, Mr. Nolan Parks," I said, crossing my arms. "And yeah, it's a snow fence. It's pretty standard for Minnesota winters." Patricia let out a laugh that sounded more like a bark. "Standard? Nothing about that monstrosity is standard for our community. Our HOA covenants clearly state that all fencing must be approved by the board before installation, and they must be made of wood, vinyl, or wrought iron in approved colors. That thing violates at least 3 different regulations." I felt my jaw tighten. I'd moved into this house just 6 months ago, right after my divorce from Jessica became final. The last thing I needed was HOA drama, but I also knew my rights. "Actually, Patricia, this snow fence is required by Minnesota State Building Code for properties within 200 feet of a state highway. My backyard borders Highway 52. I don't need HOA approval for something that's legally mandated." Her face flushed red. "I don't care what you think you know about state codes. I've been managing this HOA for 12 years and I know our rules inside and out. That fence needs to come down or you'll be fined. $200 per day until it's removed." $200. I couldn't help but laugh. "For following state law, for violating our covenants, you have until Monday morning. I'll be sending you a formal notice by the end of today." Patricia spun on her heel and marched back down my driveway, leaving me standing there in disbelief. I pulled out my phone and called my buddy Travis, who worked as a building inspector for the city. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "What's up, Nolan?" "Hey man, quick question. The snow fence I installed yesterday, that's legally required, right? Because my property backs up to the highway." "Yeah, absolutely. State Code Section 1309.0331 requires snow fencing for any residential property within 200 feet of a state or federal highway in designated snow zones. Rochester's definitely in a snow zone." "Why?" "Because my HOA president just threatened to fine me $200 a day if I don't take it down." Travis whistled. "Ouch, that's rough. But she can't do that. State law supersedes HOA rules. You want me to send you the code citation? That'd be great." "Thanks, Travis. No problem." "Hey, while I've got you on the phone, you should know something else. If your HOA president is so concerned about property codes, she might want to check her own compliance. I was out your way last week doing some inspections, and I noticed a few properties that looked like they were missing required safety features." "Like what?" "Carbon monoxide detectors are mandatory in Minnesota for any home built or sold after 2007. Window well egress covers need to meet specific standards. Deck railings have to be a certain height. Little things that HOAs usually don't care about, but they're still legally required. I felt a small grin spread across my face. Interesting. Very interesting. After hanging up with Travis, I spent the next hour researching Minnesota property codes. What I found was enlightening. Not only was my snow fence completely legal, but HOAs in Minnesota were explicitly prohibited from enforcing rules that contradicted state or local building codes. I printed out several relevant statutes and code sections, highlighting the key passages. Around noon, my neighbor from across the street, an elderly man named Harold Chen, shuffled over while I was clearing snow from my walkway. "Saw Patricia giving you an earful this morning," he said, his breath creating small clouds in the cold air. "Yeah, she's got a problem with my snow fence." Harold shook his head. "That woman's got a problem with everything. Last month she tried to fine the Johnsons for having a red front door. Said it wasn't an approved color. They had to show her the paint was a custom mix that actually was on the approved list, just in different lighting. She sounds like a real piece of work. You don't know the half of it. She fined me $300 last year because my maple tree dropped leaves into the common area. Told me I had to remove the tree. 100-year-old maple. I fought her on it, but it cost me $2,000 in lawyer fees. Eventually, she backed down, but only after I threatened to sue her personally." "Why do people keep her as president?" Harold sighed. "Most folks in the neighborhood are too busy to come to HOA meetings. Patricia and her little group of friends vote themselves into office every year. There's maybe 10 people who show up to elections out of 200 homes. It's a mess." We talked for a few more minutes before Harold headed back inside, but his words stuck with me. Patricia was a bully, plain and simple, and she'd been getting away with it for years because nobody had the time or energy to fight back. That afternoon, the formal notice arrived. Patricia must have hand-delivered it because I found it wedged in my front door. The letter was typed on official HOA letterhead and detailed my supposed violations. According to the notice, my snow fence violated 3 separate covenants: unauthorized fence installation, improper fencing material, and unapproved coloring visible from the street. The fine structure started at $200 per day, effective Monday morning, with the possibility of legal action if I didn't comply within 30 days. I sat at my kitchen table and drafted a response. I kept it professional but firm, citing the specific Minnesota statutes that required my snow fence and the state laws that prevented HOAs from superseding building codes. I included Travis's contact information as a reference and attached copies of the relevant code sections. I finished by requesting a formal hearing before the HOA board, and suggested that Patricia might want to review her own property's code compliance before pursuing frivolous violations against other homeowners. Sunday morning, I drove to Patricia's house to deliver my response in person. She lived in one of the larger homes in Meadowbrook Estates, a 2-story colonial with pristine white siding and black shutters. Her yard was immaculate, even in winter, with decorative bushes wrapped in burlap and a brick walkway cleared of every snowflake. I rang the doorbell and waited. Patricia opened the door wearing yoga pants and an annoyed expression. "Mr. Parks, I wasn't expecting visitors. I wanted to give you this personally." I handed her my letter. "It's my response to your violation notice." She barely glanced at it. "There's nothing to respond to. Remove the fence or pay the fines." The fence is legally required by state code. I've cited the specific statutes in my letter. You can't fine me for following the law. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "I suggest you consult with a lawyer, Mr. Parks, because you're going to need one." The HOA board meets Tuesday evening. We'll discuss your violations then. She started to close the door. I noticed you don't have window well covers on your basement windows, I said quickly. The door stopped moving. Excuse me, window well covers. They're required by Minnesota building code for any window well deeper than 44 inches. I couldn't help but notice yours don't have covers. That's a safety violation. Someone could fall in or a child could get trapped. My windows are perfectly fine. I'm sure they are. But the code's the code, right? That's what you keep telling me, I smiled politely. Anyway, I'll see you at the board meeting Tuesday. Have a nice day, Patricia. I walked back to my truck, feeling her glare boring into my back. Maybe I was being petty, but after spending 6 months rebuilding my life following a messy divorce, I wasn't in the mood to be pushed around by a power-hungry HOA president. Monday morning, I woke up to find another letter from Patricia. This one informed me that my fence violation fine had been increased to $300 per day due to my hostile and threatening behavior toward the HOA president. Apparently, pointing out her code violations qualified as threatening. I called Travis again. Can she do that? Just arbitrarily increase fines? Not really. Most HOA bylaws have specific fine structures that they have to follow. She can't just make up numbers. You should request a copy of the HOA bylaws and covenants. They're required to provide them to homeowners. I sent an email to the HOA board requesting a complete copy of all governing documents. Within an hour, I received a reply from Patricia stating that the documents were available for review at her home by appointment only. I responded that Minnesota law required HOAs to provide copies of governing documents to homeowners within 10 business days of a written request, preferably in electronic format. The rest of Monday was quiet, but I used the time to do more research. I discovered that Minnesota had fairly strict laws governing HOAs, including requirements for proper meeting notices, quorum standards, and financial transparency. I also found several complaints filed against Meadowbrook Estates HOA with the Minnesota Attorney General's office, most of them related to improper fines and lack of due process. Tuesday evening, I arrived at the community center for the HOA board meeting. The room was set up with a long table at the front where 5 people sat, Patricia in the center like a queen holding court. About 15 homeowners were scattered in folding chairs facing the board. Patricia banged a gavel on the table. This meeting of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association is now called to order. First order of business, we need to discuss a serious violation by one of our residents. She looked directly at me. Mr. Nolan Parks has erected an unauthorized, unsightly fence on his property in clear violation of our community standards. I raised my hand. I'd like to address the board. You'll have a chance to speak when I call on you, Patricia snapped. One of the other board members, a middle-aged man with glasses, cleared his throat. Actually, Patricia, if this meeting is about Mr. Parks's alleged violation, he should be allowed to present his side. Patricia shot him a look that could melt steel, but she gestured toward me. Fine. Mr. Parks, you have 2 minutes. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. Thank you. As I explained in my written response, the snow fence on my property is required by Minnesota State Building Code Section 1309.0331. This code mandates snow fencing for any residential property within 200 feet of a state or federal highway in designated snow zones. My property backs directly onto Highway 52, which means I'm not just allowed to have the fence, I'm required to have it. State law supersedes HOA covenants, which means the HOA cannot fine me for complying with a legal requirement. I pulled out copies of the statute and handed them to each board member. I've included the full text of the code, along with a letter from a city building inspector confirming that my fence is not only legal but necessary for safety reasons. Wind-driven snow from the highway can create dangerous drifts without proper fencing. Patricia barely glanced at the papers. This is ridiculous. We have standards in this community. The man with glasses, whose nameplate read Robert Martinez, was actually reading the documents. Patricia, this looks legitimate. If it's a state requirement, we can't really fight it. Of course we can fight it. We have covenants. Covenants that can't supersede state law, Robert said firmly. He looked at me. Mr. Parks, is this fence temporary or permanent? It's seasonal. I'll take it down in April when the snow season ends and put it back up in November, as recommended by the state guidelines. Another board member, a woman in her 40s named Susan Lee, nodded. That seems reasonable. I don't see how we can fine someone for following state law. Patricia's face was turning an alarming shade of red. This is my HOA, and I decide what's reasonable. It's not your HOA, Patricia, Robert said quietly. It belongs to all of us, and I move that we dismiss this violation and rescind any fines issued to Mr. Parks. I second that motion, Susan said immediately. Patricia looked around the table at the other two board members, both of whom nodded their agreement. Fine, she slammed her hand on the table, but I'm noting my objection for the record. This sets a terrible precedent. The only precedent it sets is that we follow the law, Robert said. He turned to me. Mr. Parks, on behalf of the board, I apologize for this confusion. Your violation notice is dismissed. I nodded my thanks and returned to my seat, but the meeting wasn't over. A woman in the back row raised her hand. While we're on the topic of code violations, I'd like to bring something up. Patricia glared at her. This isn't open forum time, Jennifer. Actually, according to the bylaws, homeowners can raise concerns during board meetings if they relate to community issues, Robert said, checking a binder in front of him. Go ahead, Jennifer. Jennifer stood up. I've noticed that several homes in our community don't have proper carbon monoxide detectors, which are required by state law. I'm concerned about safety, especially with all the gas heating systems we have. Susan leaned forward. That's a good point. Should we be conducting safety audits? Absolutely not, Patricia said quickly. What homeowners do inside their houses is their business. Unless it's a code violation, I said, unable to help myself. All eyes turned to me. I mean, if we're going to enforce codes and rules, shouldn't we make sure everyone's following the actual legal requirements, not just aesthetic preferences? Robert nodded slowly. Mr. Parks has a point. Jennifer, do you have specific concerns about particular properties? I'd rather not single anyone out, but I think a general safety notice to all homeowners would be appropriate. Just reminding everyone about smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, window well safety, that sort of thing. Patricia's knuckles were white as she gripped the gavel. I think we've wasted enough time on this topic. Meeting adjourned. She banged the gavel before anyone could object and stormed out of the room. After the meeting, several homeowners came up to thank me for standing up to Patricia. Robert Martinez pulled me aside. Hey, I appreciate you bringing those code citations. Patricia's been running roughshod over this board for years, and frankly, most of us are tired of it. Why don't you vote her out? Robert sighed. She controls the voting bloc. Her friends show up to every election and vote as a group. The rest of the community doesn't participate, but maybe this will wake people up. Over the next few days, I noticed a shift in the neighborhood. More people were walking by my house, looking at the snow fence, sometimes stopping to chat. Harold Chen told me that Patricia had been going door to door, trying to drum up support for a special meeting to override the board's decision on my fence. Thursday afternoon, I received a certified letter from a law firm in downtown Rochester. My stomach dropped as I opened it, expecting a lawsuit. Instead, I found a cease and desist letter ordering me to remove my snow fence within 48 hours or face legal action. The letter claimed I was creating a nuisance, diminishing property values, and violating multiple HOA covenants. I immediately called my own lawyer, a woman named Angela Frost who'd handled my divorce. She listened to the situation and laughed. They hired Jameson and Burke. Those guys are bottom feeders. They send scary letters but rarely follow through. Send me everything you have and I'll draft a response. Angela's response was swift and brutal. She not only cited the same state codes I'd referenced, but also included case law from 3 different Minnesota court cases, where HOAs had tried and failed to enforce rules that contradicted state building codes. She pointed out that pursuing legal action against me would likely result in a countersuit for harassment and legal fees, and she CC'd the Minnesota Attorney General's office, which had authority over HOA disputes. The next Tuesday, I attended another HOA board meeting, this time packed with nearly 50 homeowners. Word had spread about Patricia's attempted intimidation, and people were angry. The meeting opened with Robert Martinez reading a prepared statement. After reviewing the situation with Mr. Parks's snow fence, consulting with our HOA attorney, and researching Minnesota state law, the board has determined that Mr. Parks is in full compliance with all applicable regulations. Furthermore, we've discovered that several actions taken by our HOA president over the past year may have violated homeowner rights and state HOA laws. Patricia stood up abruptly. That's absurd. Everything I've done has been to protect property values and maintain our community standards. Patricia, please sit down, Susan Lee said. We've received documentation of over 30 fines issued in the past year alone, many of them for violations that either don't exist in our covenants or are superseded by state law. A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone shouted, "How much money has the HOA collected in fines?" Robert looked uncomfortable. "That's part of what we're investigating. Our financial records show significant fine revenue, but the accounting is unclear about where those funds have been allocated. This is outrageous." Patricia's voice was shrill. "I've given 12 years to this community and this is the thanks I get. A witch hunt. It's not a witch hunt to ask for transparency," Robert said calmly. "We're required by law to maintain clear financial records. I'm calling for a vote to authorize a full audit of HOA finances for the past 3 years. "I second that motion," Susan said immediately. The vote was unanimous among the board members, with Patricia abstaining. She grabbed her purse and coat. "Fine. Audit away. You won't find anything wrong because I've been meticulous, but I'm done with this. I resign, effective immediately." She marched toward the door. "Patricia, wait," Robert called. "You can't just resign. We need a transition, access to records, bank accounts." "Get a lawyer," Patricia shot back. "I'll have everything boxed up by Friday. You can pick it up from my house." She slammed the door behind her. The room erupted in chatter. Robert banged the gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. "Everyone, please, we'll sort this out. The board will continue operating. I'll assume the role of interim president, and we'll schedule elections within 60 days as required by our bylaws." After the meeting, I was surrounded by neighbors sharing their own stories of Patricia's overreach. One couple had been fined for having a basketball hoop that was supposedly too visible from the street. Another family was threatened with liens on their property for having the wrong shade of beige siding. The more I heard, the more I realized Patricia had been running a petty fiefdom, not a homeowners association. That weekend, Robert called me. "Nolan, I need your help with something. We're trying to access the HOA bank accounts, but Patricia set them up in a way that requires her signature. We're getting the bylaws reviewed, but in the meantime, we're stuck. She's also got all the physical records, and she's not answering her phone or door. Have you tried getting law enforcement involved? Our HOA attorney says it's complicated. The money technically belongs to the HOA, but Patricia's technically authorized to access it. We need to prove mismanagement or theft, and we can't do that without the records." Monday morning, I was drinking coffee when I saw a police car pull up to Patricia's house. Then another. Then an unmarked sedan. I grabbed my coat and walked down the street, joining a small crowd of neighbors watching from a distance. Harold Chen was there, binoculars in hand like we were at a sporting event. "What's going on?" I asked. "No idea, but those guys in the sedan are FBI, I think." "See the jackets?" My heart rate picked up. FBI. This was way bigger than HOA drama. We watched as officers spent over an hour inside Patricia's house, eventually carrying out boxes and boxes of documents. Later that day, I got a call from Robert. He sounded stunned. "Nolan, you're not going to believe this. The FBI raided Patricia's house. Turns out she's been under investigation for mail fraud and wire fraud. She was running the same HOA scam in 3 other communities under different names." "You're kidding." I wish I was. Apparently, she'd been collecting fines from homeowners, depositing them into HOA accounts, and then transferring them to personal accounts. Over the past 5 years, she's stolen nearly $200,000 from various HOAs. Our HOA was just one of her targets. I sat down heavily. How did nobody catch this earlier? She was smart about it. Small amounts over time, fake invoices for maintenance that never happened, inflated quotes from contractors who were her friends and kicked back part of the payment. The FBI got involved when someone in another HOA she ran reported her to the postal inspectors for mail fraud. They've been building a case for months. What happens now? We get a forensic accountant to go through our books and figure out exactly how much she stole from us. The FBI says we'll likely recover most of it through asset seizure, but it'll take time. In the meantime, we're suspending all fines and doing a complete review of our rules to make sure we're actually following the law. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Patricia was arrested and charged with mail fraud, wire fraud, and theft by deception. The local news covered the story extensively, interviewing homeowners from multiple communities where she'd operated. I gave a statement to the FBI about her attempted intimidation over my snow fence, which they added to their evidence of her pattern of creating false violations to generate fine revenue. The forensic audit of Meadowbrook Estates revealed that Patricia had stolen nearly $43,000 from our HOA over 3 years. She'd created fake maintenance invoices, charged homeowners inflated fines for made-up violations, and transferred money to personal accounts disguised as contractor payments. The FBI traced similar patterns in 2 other communities she'd managed, bringing her total theft to over $200,000. In March, the HOA held special elections. Robert Martinez was elected president. Susan Lee became vice president, and 3 new board members were chosen from engaged homeowners who actually cared about community welfare rather than petty power. Their first act was to revise all HOA covenants to remove vague language that could be abused and to ensure compliance with Minnesota state laws. My snow fence stayed up through March, doing exactly what it was supposed to do, preventing dangerous snow drifts from the highway from accumulating in my yard. When April arrived and the snow finally melted, I took it down and stored it in my garage, ready for next winter. Patricia's trial happened in June. I attended the sentencing hearing, curious to see the end of this saga. She'd pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. The judge was not sympathetic. "Miss Whitmore, you systematically exploited people who trusted you to manage their communities," the judge said. "You created an environment of fear and intimidation, targeting vulnerable homeowners who lacked the resources to fight back. You stole money that should have gone to maintaining neighborhoods and making them safe. You've shown no remorse for your actions." Patricia stood silently, her expensive clothes and perfect hair unable to hide the defeat in her posture. "I'm sentencing you to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You're also ordered to pay full restitution of $213,000 to the victims of your fraud, plus fines and penalties. You'll have no involvement with any homeowner association or community management organization for life." Patricia was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. I felt no satisfaction, just a weary sense of relief that it was over. That evening, the new HOA board held a community cookout in the neighborhood park. Someone had hung a banner reading Meadowbrook Estates, under new management. Kids ran around playing while adults grilled burgers and caught up with neighbors they'd been too intimidated to talk to under Patricia's reign. Robert Martinez found me by the grill, beer in hand. "You know, Nolan, if you hadn't stood up to her about that snow fence, none of this might have come out. The FBI agent told me your complaint about the fake fines helped them establish her pattern of behavior. I just didn't want to pay $200 a day for following the law. It was more than that. You showed people they could fight back. Half the board members we elected were homeowners you inspired to get involved." He raised his beer. "To snow fences and standing up to tyrants." I clinked my bottle against his. "To reasonable HOAs and following actual laws." As summer progressed, Meadowbrook Estates transformed. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. People stopped being afraid to decorate their homes or plant gardens. The new board focused on actual community needs like fixing the playground equipment and organizing neighborhood watch programs, instead of measuring grass height and counting how many flowers were in window boxes. In August, I helped Harold Chen organize a block party. We closed down our street, set up tables and games, and invited everyone to bring food. Over 100 people showed up, many meeting their neighbors for the first time despite living in the community for years. "This is what it should have been all along," Harold said, watching kids play in the street while adults chatted and laughed. "A community, not a dictatorship." I had to agree. The irony wasn't lost on me that a simple orange snow fence, something I'd installed without much thought, had been the catalyst for exposing corruption and transforming an entire neighborhood. Sometimes the smallest act of resistance can lead to the biggest changes. In November, when the first snow started falling, I pulled out my orange snow fence and installed it along my property line again. This time, there were no complaints, no threatening letters, no power-hungry HOA president demanding its removal. Several neighbors even came by to ask where I'd bought it, as they realized they were close enough to the highway to benefit from one too. Patricia remained in federal prison, her assets seized to pay restitution to the HOAs she'd defrauded. The house she'd been so proud of was sold, with proceeds going to victims. The 3 other communities she'd managed underwent similar transformations to ours, with new boards, revised rules, and a renewed focus on actual community building. I stood in my driveway one Saturday morning in December, making sure the fence was properly secured against the winter winds. The morning was cold and quiet, snow falling gently around me. A year ago, I'd been newly divorced, uncertain about my future, overwhelmed by the idea of maintaining a house alone. Now I felt settled, part of a real community with neighbors who were friends rather than strangers. A car pulled up, and Travis got out, grinning. "Still fighting the good fight, I see." "Just following code," I said. "That's all you ever did, man. Hey, you hear the city's considering a commendation for you. Apparently, your HOA situation inspired them to create new oversight procedures for community associations. They want to prevent future Patricia situations." "That's great, but I don't need a commendation. I just wanted to keep my legally required fence." Travis laughed. "That's exactly why you deserve it. You didn't back down when someone tried to bully you. You stood your ground, followed the law, and accidentally exposed a criminal operation. That's pretty heroic if you ask me." I didn't feel heroic. I felt like a guy who'd bought a snow fence and refused to be pushed around, but I suppose that was enough. Sometimes standing up to small injustices prevents bigger ones. Sometimes asking questions reveals corruption. Sometimes a bright orange snow fence is more than just plastic mesh and stakes. It's a statement that rules should make sense and authorities should be held accountable. The neighborhood settled into a peaceful winter rhythm. Kids sledded in the hills behind the community center. Neighbors helped each other shovel driveways. The HOA board focused on maintaining common areas and organizing community events instead of generating fine revenue. Our monthly dues went toward actual improvements like new streetlights and repaving the parking lot at the community center. In January, exactly 1 year after Patricia had first confronted me about my snow fence, I attended an HOA meeting. The atmosphere was completely different. People actually smiled and chatted before the meeting started. Robert ran things efficiently but pleasantly, focusing on real issues like snow removal budgets and planning a spring cleanup day. During open forum, a new resident raised their hand. "I'm curious about something. I've heard stories about the previous HOA president. What exactly happened?" Robert glanced at me, then addressed the room. "Our previous president violated the trust of this community in serious ways. She's currently serving time in federal prison for fraud, but that's behind us now. We've learned important lessons about accountability, transparency, and the importance of community participation. We encourage everyone to get involved, ask questions, and hold the board responsible for our decisions." The new resident nodded, satisfied. The meeting continued with discussions about normal HOA business, nothing dramatic or contentious, just neighbors trying to maintain their community together. After the meeting, a young couple approached me. "You're Nolan Parks, right? We just bought the house on Maple Street." The realtor told us about what happened with the HOA fraud. "We wanted to thank you for cleaning things up. That's actually why we felt comfortable buying here." "I just wanted to keep my fence," I said for what felt like the 100th time. "Maybe," the woman said. "But you did a lot more than that. You gave people their community back." As winter deepened into February, my snow fence continued doing its job, preventing highway snow from creating dangerous drifts in my yard. Every time I looked at it, I was reminded that sometimes the simplest things matter most. Following the law, even when it's inconvenient. Standing up to bullies, even when it's scary. Asking questions, even when authorities try to silence you. The orange plastic mesh flapped in the winter wind, bright against the white snow, a symbol of resistance and redemption. It was just a fence, required by state code, nothing special. But it had changed everything. In March, as the snow began to melt and spring approached, I knew I'd be taking down the fence soon and storing it for next year. But I also knew that next November, when winter threatened again, I'd put it right back up without hesitation or fear. Because it was my right, my responsibility, and my small way of standing up for what was legal and correct. The Meadowbrook Estates community had learned that lesson too. We'd learned that rules should serve people, not control them. That leadership should build community, not exploit it. That standing together was stronger than being bullied alone. Patricia had tried to make me remove a legally required safety fence because she didn't like how it looked. In doing so, she'd exposed her own violations, not just of HOA rules or building codes, but of basic decency and law. The irony was perfect. A woman obsessed with catching others in violations had been committing serious crimes herself. By April, when I finally took down the snow fence and stored it away, Meadowbrook Estates had been transformed. The community thrived under fair leadership. Property values increased, not because of arbitrary aesthetic rules, but because people actually wanted to live in a neighborhood where they felt safe and respected. The new HOA board continued making improvements, always focused on real community needs rather than generating fine revenue. I settled into a comfortable routine in my home, no longer the new divorced guy trying to figure things out, but an established member of a real community. Harold Chen and I became close friends, often sharing morning coffee and comparing notes on our gardens. Robert Martinez invited me to join the board, but I declined. I'd done my part. Now I just wanted to live peacefully. Sometimes, when giving tours of the neighborhood to prospective buyers or new residents, real estate agents would point out my property and tell the story of the snow fence that brought down a criminal HOA president. The story grew and changed in the telling, becoming neighborhood legend. I didn't mind. If it helped people remember to stand up for themselves and question authority when something didn't seem right, then let the legend grow. The legal aftermath of Patricia's crimes continued for months. More victims came forward from other communities where she'd operated under different schemes. The final restitution amount exceeded $300,000. The FBI commended the homeowners who'd come forward, particularly crediting the documentation and evidence we'd provided. In May, the city did present me with a commendation at a council meeting. I tried to decline, but Robert convinced me it would be good for the community to have the positive publicity. So I stood awkwardly in front of the Rochester City Council while they praised my courage in standing up to corruption and fraud in community governance. They presented me with a plaque and took photos for the local newspaper. The next day, the paper ran a story with the headline "Snow Fence Leads to Prison Sentence for Fraudulent HOA President." The article detailed the entire saga, from my initial fence installation to Patricia's sentencing. I framed the article and hung it in my garage, right above where I stored the orange snow fence. Life continued. Summer brought warm weather and neighborhood barbecues. Fall brought beautiful colors and community harvest festivals. When November arrived again and snow threatened, I pulled out my fence and installed it, just like the year before. This time, several neighbors had their own snow fences up too, creating a bright orange line of safety along the properties nearest the highway. Standing in my driveway after finishing the installation, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I'd exposed a criminal or changed a community, though those things mattered, but because I'd stood up for what was right when it would have been easier to back down. Because I'd followed the law even when someone tried to bully me into breaking it. Because I'd asked questions instead of accepting arbitrary authority. That's what the snow fence represented to me now. not just a safety requirement or a piece of plastic mesh, but a reminder that individual actions matter, that standing up to small injustices can prevent bigger ones, that asking for accountability can expose corruption, that ordinary people doing ordinary things, like installing a legally required fence, can change the world around them in unexpected ways. The orange fence flapped in the November wind, bright and visible, marking the boundary of my property and the beginning of a better community. It would stand there all winter, doing its job, protecting against dangerous snow drifts. And when spring came, I'd take it down and store it away, confident in the knowledge that when next winter arrived, I'd put it right back up again. Because some things are worth fighting for. Some rules make sense, and some fences, no matter how ugly someone might think they are, serve a purpose far more important than aesthetics. They keep people safe. They follow the law. And sometimes, when the circumstances align just right, they bring justice to those who thought themselves above accountability. The snow began to fall as evening approached, and I headed inside to the warmth of my home in Meadowbrook Estates, a community that had learned the hard way that good governance requires transparency, accountability, and respect for both the law and the people it serves. The snow fence stood guard outside, bright orange against the white landscape, a beacon of common sense in a world that sometimes forgets the most important rules are the ones that keep everyone safe.